You're listening to Music for a While, a podcast from Westben. In this episode, artistic director Brian Finley sits down with his friend Brian Manker, over Zoom, of course, to discuss Beethoven and the recording of the new Orford String Quartet's digital concert from the barn. Thank you to the sponsors of this episode, Caravaggio Orthotics Clinic, and to our Galaxy sponsor, Finley and Associates. If you are watching the video recording of this conversation, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. If you have found us through Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a quick review.
Hi, Brian Manker is our guest today. Welcome, Brian. Nice to have you here.
Hey, Brian. Nice to have you. Always nice to be with another Brian. It's always good.
It's always the
Always
best.
good.
So tell me, how are things in Montreal? How are you doing over there?
Well, as you probably know, it's sunny today, and that helps. Springtime is just showing its little first glimmer here. A few crocuses popping their brave little shoots up above the ground, and squirrels are busy digging, rooting for whatever I don't know what they're rooting for, but they seem to be digging around. So, in that sense, it's good.
Probably
We're
rooting
still in the midst of it. We're still in the midst of a pandemic that hasn't really changed, I have to say. So,
here we
it's
are.
going on,
Yeah,
but
here we
we're
are
here.
in early April for sure, and just days away from your premiere of a wonderful digital concert at the barn. So we're still in odd times. You and I spoke a few months ago, and it was strange then, and it's
Yeah.
strange. What's going on professionally for you at the moment? What's the professional world like?
Well, obviously, concert halls have been shut down since I guess we gave a couple of concerts in September, maybe early October. The orchestra did, and also a string quartet. We played one concert in October. And then after that, everything shut down, and we're supposed to play our first concert of the OSM tonight in I don't know how many months that is, over 6 months, I guess, with a limited audience. Whether that'll continue or not is anybody's guess. For now, they're going to give it a try. So we have a 2,000 seat hall with 250 people in it, and it's going to seem like a big event. Even with that many people, it's going to seem like a big event, I tell you.
And, and the orchestra. What about the orchestra? How big is the orchestra?
The orchestra is somewhat reduced. Instead of having 10 cellos, we have six. So, there's limit just because of the distancing. They've built out the stage, made it larger so that there's more space between people. Between the conductor at the front of the stage and the timpani player way at the back, it feels like a football field. It feels very far, but after months and months of that, I guess we're kind of used to it. It is a little odd, generally in an orchestra you sit rather close together, somewhat close together, and you have a stand partner and such things in the string section. No stand partners. So you're on a stand by yourself. You feel like you're kind of on a little island playing and trying to connect with the other little islands out there. And it's an adjustment, but I think it works. It's a little different, but it took a little while for everybody to figure out how to deal with it. But so far so good.
Well, and at least it is live, which is really wonderful. I mean, there's the feeling of live music in the air. What's the relationship with your audience feel like? Like 250 people in a several thousand seat. Oh, sounds like
Yeah.
it's actually.
Well, it has been a while since we did this. So, my memory of it, of course, was that, this is back in October, and I guess I'll find out again tonight. My memory of it was that it was actually kind of emotional for everybody. The people that are there because they want to be there, and you're sharing something with actual live humans instead of doing it, for a camera or a microphone and then sharing it that way, which is a very different feeling somehow. It really is. You're trying to create a live experience instead of record something for later viewing. It's very different. It's hard to describe why, but it definitely feels emotionally and energy wise quite different. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you
So looking forward to it.
what it's like to prepare for something like that. And we'll talk about it with the string quartet in a minute, because of course, string quartet is such a phenomenally intimate experience. It's really deep and personal conversation with people standing right next to you. So, is it hard to prepare for a symphony concert?
Well, I guess the distanced ones, the virtual ones, there's not as much electricity or energy about it. It's really, go and deliver and go and, do your best, for sure. When there's an audience, I think there's a little different feeling. Like, and with a quartet, there's a different kind of communication too. But it's like making a record. The difference between making a recording and making a performance. You know that difference, I'm sure. It feels very different. Um, and even if you're presenting it as a performance, which it is in essence, it's a live performance. If there's nobody there except a microphone and a camera, it's not the same thing. Somehow it feels different.
Yeah, sure does.
Better or worse, I don't know. It's just different. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, it takes back to when you guys were here. You guys were here to record one of the most magnificent pieces of the Western classical repertoire, the third movement of Opus
Yeah.
132, String Quartet, and it was a sublime experience, I must say. As an auditor, I was one of the only people in the hall listening to you
You
record it.
you were one of the audience members that day, one of the few. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a very special thing for me. But what what do you remember from that experience? Because that's another one where there probably wasn't much time to prepare for that, or preparation had to happen in a very special way to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was different because our usual violist Eric Nowlin lives in Detroit now, and so there's border issues, quarantine issues, and so he didn't join us. And Douglas McNabney played stepped in and played and did a great job. Just fit in so easily and quickly, and credit to him. I mean, my goodness, he just came in and was just right there. Yeah, it's a different kind of preparation. I mean, I remember it was a little cool that day. I do remember that. Do you remember how chilly it was? What
And
day was that, Brian? Do you remember?
it was a cold day. It was a cold day in
It
September.
was a cold day. Yeah, it was end of September or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a bit chilly in the barn, and there's something about that slow movement, the third movement of that quartet, that's so there's a lot of stillness in it. So you're not doing things that are, they're intense, but they're not physically athletic and intense. So you don't really get to warm yourself up in a way. I do remember that. I remember it being a little chilly. That's the I remember it sounding great in there, and that it was just a joy
It
to
was.
play. I do remember that.
Well, can we talk a little bit about this quartet, because it's a magnificent piece of music, and I think you had an amazing reason for choosing this. So there's 16 Beethoven string quartets. So tell us where this one fits in and what it's all about.
Well, this one fits in at near the end. I think it was written in 1825, if I'm correct. Could be wrong, but it was part of a set of three that he wrote as a commission for a Russian count, Count Galitzin, who sent him some money from St. Petersburg, and Beethoven wrote these three quartets, which were meant to be sort of like the three Razumovsky quartets as a set. But the opus numbers are all over the place. So it should be opus 127, opus 132, and then opus 130. That's the order that they're meant to be played in. But because Beethoven died, they were published in a different order, and they end up with different opus numbers. Long story short. This one is kind of unusual because string quartets usually have four movements. That's sort of the standard of the form up to that time. Well, Beethoven decides to write five. Kind of unusual. And it has a sort of an arch form. So the first and last movements have some relation. Second and fourth are also somewhat related. Fourth is really transitional. And the third movement is kind of like the keystone of the arch. That's the movement that we played. And that movement is also in five sections. So the outer structure of five is mirrored on this inner structure of five. It's fascinating. Like the mind of the guy and the constructive capabilities of his, of his mind in creating unusual things that feel very natural and very organic. He seemed to be on a path to writing more and more movements. This quartet has 5 movements. The one that follows it, Opus 130, has 6.
Mm.
And the one that follows that, Opus 131, guess how many? 7. So who knows? I mean, it's kind of odd, isn't it? Like he has in these sort of forms where he's like sort of pulling it apart. He's creating something completely new. And then at the very end, he returns in his last quartet in a rather conservative manner, I think, to a 4-movement work, which is looking backward a little bit more in terms of style and substance and just process. But he was really experimenting, in his later years there for sure.
Well, it's very
Uh,
interesting
the genesis of, I'll go on even more if you want. I can go on and on about Beethoven, Brian. You know that. Yeah. So the this movement has a subtitle, or has a title, which is the Heiliger Dankgesang, which was the holy song of thanks, like to the Creator. And why is he giving thanks? There's a section in there. Well, it's on the return to good health. I think it continues. Song of thanks to the Creator on return to good health. Basically, Beethoven had been ill, and basically the beginnings of the illness that eventually killed him, I think, just in March of 1827. So he was starting to feel a little frail and fragile, and he went through a period of being bedridden, and then was feeling better. So he thought, well, what better to do than to write a movement sort of describing that? So the of the 5 sections, the first, third, and fifth, so the odd numbered portions, are related. And they have this, they're in the Lydian mode, which is another musicological thing. But what all that really means, all you really have to understand about that as a non-musician, is that it makes certain kinds of cadences or, resolutions almost impossible. They just don't happen naturally. So what he's done is he's created this sort of stasis, like it has this amazing static quality where you think it's going to cadence, but it can't quite do it because that note is unavailable in the Lydian mode. So it comes off as meditative, as kind of infinite. I mean, you think about Beethoven and you think about sort of the arrow of time in Beethoven, and it's always driving forward, isn't it? It's often just really going forward, and it's really, future driven somehow. Well, in this one, he seems to be trying to turn the arrow around, and or to make it not move. He's really trying to create something that is spacious and open, and just full of contemplation, like a prayer, really. I mean, I was avoiding going into the religious symbology of it, but it is there. And the Lydian mode is also seen in, it's one of the Greek modes scales. It's seen as it's associated with good health or with healing. So he also chose that, I'm sure, quite on purpose. The odd numbers, go ahead, guess. I mean, I can go on and on about this, Brian, but please ask.
Actually, I was really excited about the Lydian mode because it is a really interesting thing. And seeing I'm sitting right here at a piano, and I thought maybe just we could just have a very brief description of what that is, because it does kick it kicks one of the legs out from the whole harmony. Here is a normal major.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, here's a normal major scale. And the Lydian mode raises that fourth, so it's that's the one there, and that's the one that, especially when you're working with a master like Beethoven, who's so whose craft is so exquisite in a classical sense, to actually remove one of those firm barriers is an interesting thing. And I think further to this health kind of concept, it's always lifting up. It's an uplifting kind of a feel to the scale. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, actually, like the choice of it, and his his sticking to it. I mean, he will not let go of that Lydian mode in spite of all the things that might, all the gestures that you would be familiar with in Beethoven. They're just slightly different in this piece. It has a Renaissance kind of a feeling to it, almost Palestrina or something, like an old motet or something from an earlier time, ancient music in a way.
Well, tell us about the contrasting sections, because they're marked with more energy or filling.
Yeah, Neue Kraft or something. Neue, which means like with new strength, new strength. So those sections are faster. They're a little bit more florid, and they seem to almost dance or to leap a little bit. They're not lively, but they are healthful, and they have the feeling of somebody, I mean, really just of somebody getting out of bed. I mean, they really, like it's a nice sunny day. I think I'll get up and go outside and have my coffee or something. I mean, they feel a little bit, like that, and the birds are chirping and the world looks wonderful, and it has that kind of a feeling about it, contrasted with the other, the prayer kind of sections. Beautiful, beautiful. And what better place to play something that has that outdoor quality than Westben,
Oh, and you can hear the birds and all of that. Nature is so alive, especially in those faster sections. But I think this is a really sublime choice of repertoire for what we're going through too, Ryan. And it's arguably you could have had the prayerful section and then the happy section, as your prayer of thanksgiving. But this continual going back and forth, back to this limbo, boy, to this joy, back to the limbo, to the joy, back to the limbo. Doesn't that sound familiar?
It sure is sounding quite familiar. I wonder how many segments of that we're going to have. you know, but definitely it feels familiar. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an incredible thing. Well, yeah, so thank you for choosing that. Thank you for playing it so magnificent. It was just great. The other thing I meant to ask you before too is the Beethoven style periods are also very interesting. The string quartets go through all the style periods, as do the piano sonatas, although I guess I have to admit that the string quartets go further than the piano sonatas because we stop at 111. And
I think so.
You're continuing on, but
Yeah. They do go further. They also go for a little bit further, maybe compositionally a little bit further. Although that big fugue in the Hammer Clavier is pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. Yeah, that's just plain nuts. But can you contrast the three areas of Beethoven with for those style periods?
Yeah, I mean, I usually the way I describe that is that the early Beethoven is a young man who's trying to make his mark as a composer. He's full of ambition. He's still, not really free of his models. He's not really free of Mozart. Not really free of Haydn yet. And he sometimes there's some imitation a little bit in some of those pieces. It's still his voice, but there's gestures that he's learned. And it's also a young man who is unaware of the impending, onset of hearing loss. So that there's no shadow of that. There's no awareness of that. You get into the middle period, and these are works that are written after he's aware that he's losing his hearing. And he's on a mission, actually, I think, to write. He feels like his time is limited, perhaps, or something. It's hard to say exactly why. But they are generally, the works that we associate with, the greatest works, the Fifth Symphony, the Seventh Symphony, the Emperor Concerto, the Violin Concerto, the Razumovsky Quartets, all these really affirmative and positive works, actually, in spite of his affliction. They end up having very positive, psychologically healthy narratives, I think, which is kind of, goes against somehow, you think, oh boy, he must be really depressed by this. But he always finds a way to write it out into a happy ending in the music. Actually, a really, triumphant even ending. And then the late period are works that were written after the hearing loss has become debilitating to the point that he's alienated, that he's unable to just have normal social interaction with people. Things have to be written down for him to understand them. So he has to, there's conversation books that these people are writing in, and he's answering verbally often. So there's a lot of one-sided conversations in those conversation books where somebody writes something and he then answers verbally, so you don't know what he actually answered. So I mean, it's a different kind of interiorness and sort of withdrawal into self that must happen with loss of hearing. That happens in the later works, and as a result, the music starts to stretch boundaries too, because it takes on sometimes a slightly abstract quality, uh, and is not quite as it's not fair to say, but sometimes it's not as sensuous. Sometimes it is more abstract. I don't know how to say it, Brian. It's a different feeling to it than it is in the middle works where it's very visceral.
Very interesting because
Um,
in the late piano works, things get the ranges get further and further and further apart, and the middle drops out. And I don't know if that's a part of where the hearing was going or what. I mean, I think it started at the top and came down, but there are things missing. There are things that are left to the imagination. It's a inward prayerfulness. It's written very much for himself, for his soul, for his God, I guess. That's the way it's sort of
yeah,
feels.
it's interesting. It really is interesting, isn't it? Like that late period, some of like this, the grappling with, I don't know, different ways of writing music, different ways of hearing music, I guess, fascinating. Some of it still sounds incredibly modern today. I mean, the Grosse Fugue, the Opus 133 movement of the finale of Opus 130 originally of the quartet, still sounds like crazy modern music. It was written in 1820, 26. Sounds crazy modern,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
incredible. It's incredible. Well, we should probably wrap things up pretty soon, but I just wanted to know what's going through the quartet's heads at the moment. I was going to say the quartet's head, but you know what I mean. It's just like how do you approach the future, you guys?
Well, it's been rocky because I mean, we haven't been able to play concerts. Eric is on the other side of the border. We have some events planned for the summer, but without Eric. So Sharon Way is going to step in and play. We did work with her briefly on something in, boy, I can't even remember what month. Maybe it was December in Toronto. So there was something that we did, and she stepped in and was great. So sort of in substitute a little bit, but I don't know what's going to happen after this. It's just so hard to know where everything's headed, and you know, uh,
Well,
yeah, right, right. It's really hard to tell. A lot of factors that could still go different directions. So
well, there should be a return to health, hopefully one of these days. And quite honestly,
I'm hoping so. Yeah.
I think it's very, very interesting to be continuing to make art with a big hole in one aspect of society of life. It's an extremely interesting challenge, and it's something that actually might help us understand Beethoven just a tiny bit more. To see when you actually remove one of these,
Yeah.
what that experience is really like, and what kind of art comes out of it.
Yeah, and also maybe something for a lot of people, I think that, that feeling of isolation and loneliness is probably something that more of us can relate to. Even if it's not every day and if it's not, um, as complete as, deafness might be, there's still a lot of things that have been removed from us. We can't see sometimes our family or sometimes our friends or for months and months at a time, it's
Well,
difficult. So,
yeah. Well, just back to
yeah.
the portrait itself, I just think he does deal with a lot of these concepts of isolation, of intense sickness and return to health and so on. But it is that return to health, and it's one of the things I just absolutely love is that final fifth section that just blossoms and blossoms and blossoms, and just says he still has that affirmation, with despite no hearing, despite all these incredible
Yeah.
challenges. It's just it really is quite a remarkable experience, a remarkable 20 minutes.
Yeah, it is incredible. Yeah, it's one of my favorite pieces of music, I mean, in the entire world, honestly. It's just so fabulous, you know. And there's something about sitting in a quartet and playing it and that just the sonorities that somehow this man who couldn't hear everything. I mean, I think maybe he could still hear a little bit, but he can't really hear what it's going to sound like. But his sort of, visceral sense of, I think, of what it actually would sound like still worked. I mean, he really got it,
Well,
Incredible writing.
yeah, it's
It's
incredible
amazing.
how you can experience a piece of music without hearing it. And it's apparently some of the early rehearsals for this piece, which I think was finalized about 2 weeks before its premiere. So I'm not sure the premiere was quite as solid as it might have been, but I think Beethoven actually apparently sat in on the rehearsals, which would make you terribly nervous, wouldn't it? To have a guy who wrote the thing who can't hear sitting in on your rehearsals. He was still
Yeah.
commenting on things like tempo and on feeling, and because he was watching the lengths of the bows, he was watching the tempos through the bows, and all kinds of different ways of experiencing, and probably even feeling the vibration of the whole thing too, which of course is how he experienced his piano music. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. I have to say, sometimes, I mean, not to trivialize it, but sometimes teaching on Zoom, if the connection isn't good, can be a little bit like that. You- you're, you know, right? You're just not sure whether what you heard is actually what happened,
That's exactly,
because of different,
yeah.
right?
And when it freezes right on the wrong note, it's just, yeah, that's quite it.
Or usually freezes with me in some awkward position with my mouth open, some crazy, crazy thing. Usually that's what happens.
Yep,
Uh,
absolutely. Well, okay, on April 17th, coming up, this is a week from this Saturday at 7 o'clock.
yeah.
We're going to be premiering this digital concert at the barn, featuring the new Orford Quartet, Brian Manker, the cellist there, and performing the third movement of the 15th String Quartet in A minor, Opus 132, the Holy Song of Thanksgiving, from a convalescent to a deity in the Lydian mode.
There
So
you go. Nice translation.
yeah, well, thank you. Well, it's been a joy to talk about this, Brian, and we're just so as always looking forward to your musical contributions. It's always a delight to have you around. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Brian.
For sure, looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing it. It just was such a pleasure to play, and even if it was chilly that day, still I remember so clearly just the sound of the quartet in that barn was just fantastic.
Okay, well, so we're over the moon with the recording. We're very, very excited about it. So we can't wait to share. So thank you very much,
Great.
and we'll see you again back at Westben, if not elsewhere.
Pleasure. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye
Brian.
bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. To hear another passionate conversation about music between Brian Finley and Brian Manker, be sure to jump back to episode 12 of this podcast. To find Brian Manker's beautiful solo digital concert at the barn, and for details on the new Orford String Quartet's digital concert at the barn, be sure to visit www.westben.ca. Thank you again to today's sponsors, Caravaggio Orthotics Clinic and Finley and Associates. Do you have any questions for Brian Finley or the Westben team? Get in touch with us at westben@westben.ca for all of your pressing musical questions. We would love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening.